Notice of this meeting was faxed to the Montclair Times, the Herald News, and the Star Ledger. The time, date, and location of this meeting were accurately set forth therein. On this same date, a copy of said notice was filed with the Township Clerk and was posted at the Public Bulletin Board in the first floor main hall of the Board of Education Building, 22 Valley Road. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We ready for a roll call, please?
Ms. Coe?
Here.
Mr. Cummings? Here. Mr. George? Here. Ms. Coleman?
Here.
Ms. Larson?
Here.
Ms. Lombard? Mr. Rosenberg? Here. Thank you.
I have passed out to the board members. We're going to do one quick piece of business before we begin with the presentation. This is a resolution of a legal settlement. It was discussed previously. May I have a motion to approve, please?
Mr. George? Abstain. Ms. Coleman?
Yes.
Ms. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
I'd like to invite Gwen Thornton from the New Jersey School Boards Association to come to the podium. This is the first time we've had such a meeting like this. It's a workshop presentation on the roles and responsibilities of board members, of the Board of Education. I would say that it's important to know the role that the New Jersey School Boards Association plays for us. We can call on them with just about any question that we could possibly have. They do our board training. Every board member is required to participate in trainings, and in this case, whenever I have a question, rather than bluff my way through, I call New Jersey School Boards. So Gwen, with that, please.
Okay. Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Gwen Thornton. I'm a field service representative of New Jersey School Boards. And just by way of background, I am a former board member. I served for 10 years, president for the last 5 on the Bridgewater Raritan Board of Education, which is in Somerset County in the central part of the state. And 100 years BC before that, I was a high school teacher in a suburban Philadelphia district. So I have always kept my hand in education, believing that it is an invaluable resource for the future of this country. And it's really, I believe I have the very best job in the world because I get to go out and work with boards of education all across the state, I believe, which ultimately benefits every child in New Jersey. So it is a pleasure to be here this evening and to present to you this workshop. Is the PowerPoint on? So,
Because it's a PowerPoint, we're probably going to move to the right so that we can see. Okay?
Okay, absolutely. And I would say please stop me at any point in time. This is really meant to be an interactive discussion, and I would be happy to answer whatever questions that you might have. When Robin and I began discussing this workshop, she had actually put this together, this PowerPoint, and so I'd like to give credit where credit is due. I simply added to it to give it some additional information that I thought might be helpful from our perspective as your professional association. And so it's really talking about how boards. Can you all hear me if I talk like this without the mic?
Oh, no. No.
No, is it?
I'm sorry, I just thought I'd ask. I'm an old teacher and I really hate microphones, so I apologize and I tend to wander as well. But I will stay planted right here and try to be as engaging as if I was walking in front of you. Board of Education have very prescribed roles by statute and by law. In the state of New Jersey, all boards of education are governed, all school districts are governed by 18A and Administrative Code 6. And so it specifically outlines for Board of Education members what they are empowered to do and what they are not empowered to do. And very often, there's some confusion around what boards can and can't do. And I think it's very helpful, especially for new board members and members of the community and public who may not attend board members meetings on a regular basis, to have an understanding of what your Board of Education is empowered to do and what it can't do. Really, boards of education have four major functions. The first and foremost is to provide oversight for the direction of the district through the creation of policy, to ensure that there is in place a system of quality instruction, which they charge the superintendent with doing and implementing, and then with having effective management of the district, meaning that they employ one person, and that is the superintendent, and then they hold him or her accountable at the end of each year for his or her performance, the progress toward meeting the district goals, and the effective allocation of resources, whether it's dollars, whether it's staff, whether it's busing, all of those pieces. And then lastly, to provide for two-way communications with the staff and with the community. They are elected by the community or appointed by your mayor to make sure that the district is well run, but not to run the school district. Boards of education are designed to help the superintendent understand and to transform the aspirations of the community into workable goals that are then given to the superintendent, and then the superintendent and all of the rest of the educators and administrators and employees of the district are responsible for seeing that adequate progress toward those goals is made on an annual basis. Okay? The superintendent leads the system. One of the things we say to new board members at new board member orientation is, you are designed to see that a district is well run, but not to run the district. And that really is the very specific, clear delineation between what is administrative function and what is Board of Education function. Okay? Here are your jobs: to make sure that you are reflecting the shared vision of your community for the goals and the aspirations for every child in Montclair, to make sure that you have collaboratively set with your administration the goals for every year. If you have a strategic plan, which is a wonderful piece to have a 5-year plan in place, and if you have strategic planning goals that run for 5 years, they become the framework for your annual goal setting. I know that you're working on the development of a strategic plan, and once that's completed, it will be a wonderful framework that will drive all of the decision-making of the board around allocation of annual resources, around staffing, around curriculum and educational decisions. All of those pieces will be driven by your strategic plan. You are responsible for the creation of policy, and your number one function is to develop policy that will provide a framework for a common understanding of how the district operates, of what the guidelines are, sort of a roadmap for community members and for staff. Okay? And then, of course, to provide constituent service. That goes back to that two-way communication piece with your community and for that administrative oversight. And those are the two areas, really, that sometimes can create some level, occasionally, of confusion. And so that's where I'd like us to spend a little time this evening getting a little greater focus around that, okay? Whenever you have a community that's interested and engaged and active in the educational process, and I commend those of you who are here tonight, it does speak to your interest and concern around the educational process. You know, boards of education deal with the two most important things in people's lives. Number one, first and foremost, are their children, and secondly, their finances, their pocketbook, their wallet, their money, okay? And in school districts, they're inexorably tied together because in order to serve the children effectively and provide for their needs, we need to go to taxpayers to help finance and support that program. And typically, when you have that kind of intertwined relationship, it generates passion in people. And so very often, it can make for some interesting discussions, okay? Board members also have relationships with other members of the educational community beyond just the superintendent, with district employees, with the Teachers Association and other bargaining units, with business and civic leaders, elected officials, and of course with the press, with journalists. And so I think it's also helpful to talk about the role of your officers, the role of your president and your vice president as we go through this. Keep in mind that your board officers have no more or less authority than any other member of the Board of Education, except when presiding over a meeting like tonight. They are charged with that responsibility of presiding over the meeting. That's officially what's in the law. They also have to sign vouchers and all kinds of warrants and so forth. But their major role is to act as a conduit from the administration to board members, to provide the board members with accurate information. Typically, in terms of agenda setting, the superintendent will meet with the board president and develop an agenda that reflects the administrative needs, and the board president providing input on board needs around what needs to go on that agenda. But keep in mind, they are no different than any other board member who sits at this table. They have no more authority. You are all equals among the 7 of you, or the 9 of you, or the 5 of you, or the 12 of you. Different districts have different setups. For those of you who may be new, we have some boards that are bigger, and we have some boards that are smaller all across the state, okay? You also have a policy that very clearly lays out that the president of the Board of Education is the spokesperson for the board. So when it comes to dealing with and responding to questions from the press, questions from the public, either the board president will speak to an issue as the spokesperson for the board, or the superintendent, depending upon the circumstances and what would be appropriate. But either one of those two individuals, or the individuals charged with that responsibility, which is sometimes a delicate balancing act. You can, in fact, delegate the spokesperson responsibility from the board president to another member of the board if the board so chooses to do that. But routinely, boards have the president as their spokesperson, unless it's a very specific issue. Let me give you an example. If you were undertaking a referendum for construction, you might have the chair of the facilities committee answer very specific questions around construction plans or the like. You might have the chair of the finance committee articulate particular pieces of the budget. If they have a more intimate working knowledge of the budget, then I would certainly recommend that you delegate a chair to do that. But on routine questions at board meetings, excuse me, and reflecting on outcomes from the board meeting if the press is to call, board members need to remember that, especially new board members, because very often the press may in fact reach out and contact you, and your response should be, here's Robin's number, she's the spokesperson for the board, please contact her or contact Dr. McCormick, and here's her phone number. Because you really don't want to find yourself being inadvertently misquoted in a newspaper. You don't want to find yourself taking a position that does not reflect what the majority of the board has determined on a particular issue. And sometimes new board members are particularly vulnerable in that circumstance. And I don't want to say with the press president that they would ever do that on purpose, but as a 10-year board member, I will tell you occasionally that has been known to happen. I'm sure not here with your local paper, but in some communities that has happened. So I just urge you to be cautious. It is always better, always, always, always to err on the side of caution than to pick up the newspaper the next morning and go, OMG, I didn't say that, or they took me out of context, or the headline reads differently than the story. So you just need to be aware of that, and that is not to not be transparent, it's not to not be accountable, it is to make sure that we are communicating an effective message that's clear and reflective of the board decisions that have taken place, okay? The board, and this is another piece that I think is key to board members understanding their role, is that you only have authority when you are sitting at a duly advertised meeting of the Board of Education, meaning when you are all sitting at that table. When you are not at a duly advertised meeting of the Board of Education and you're out in the community and you're at the ShopRite or the Quick Check or anywhere else in town, on the sidelines of a soccer game, at a concert, you are not a board member. You are a citizen of Montclair in the same way that I am a citizen of the community in which I live and was a citizen when I was not sitting at my board table, meaning you do not have any authority to respond on behalf of the board, to act or request that staff act, or to take something back to the board. You can bring it to the board table for discussion. You can appropriately reach out to your superintendent or your board president and let her know that there's an issue that needs to be addressed, but you cannot be out and about solving problems. Board members are wonderful people, which is one of the reasons I like my job. You all volunteer your time to do this, okay? So you care about kids, and most board members, 99.9% of them, want to help solve problems. You want to make things better. So it's very easy to fall into that sort of trap around, okay, let me see if I can do something to assist you with your issue. But that's not the job of the board. The job of the board is to take those issues to administration, and they're the ones that you employ to solve problems at every level. We'll talk about that in a little bit of time, okay? The other key piece is sometimes as a board member, you're going to find yourself in a minority position. The board may vote one way and you may passionately believe something else. But once the Board of Education has made a decision, it is really a best practice and a requirement of a board to support the decision of the board once it's made. So while that doesn't mean I expect you to be a cheerleader out there going wild if you disagree with the decision of the board, it does mean that you do not undermine the board by speaking against the decision of the board. So the easiest, most clear response that you as a board member can give is, I support the decision the board has made. That doesn't mean you agree with it, but you just support the board's decision because you too are a member of the board, and on the next issue you may be in the majority and someone else may be in the minority, okay? So, you know, once the board argue, debate those issues at the table, put forth your viewpoint, you know, one of the pieces of wisdom of a board is the idea that among 7 of you, or 9 of you, or 5 of you, you have different backgrounds and experiences, you have different educational background, that there's collective wisdom in sharing those discussions, hashing out issues, and coming to agreement. And once that agreement is reached, then the board and the district need to move forward. And board members need to understand that and support that movement forward, so that you're not continually rehashing the same pieces over and over and over again. Okay? In terms of your relationships with the Teachers Association, you know, I think the key piece is to remember that all of the bargaining units are here for the benefit of the children. You're not going to agree 100% of the times. Negotiations, by definition, is adversarial, so especially at those times it can be trying, but I think it helps to remember that everyone is here working on behalf of the children. And so while you may not always agree, you certainly can know that everyone's best interest are the children of Montclair. You may have differences, you can agree to disagree amiably, but they are here, they are your professional staff, and they deserve to be treated with respect, okay? In terms of your relationship with journalists, and I spoke to this a couple of moments ago, you do have policy that outlines this, and you need to make sure that you abide by your policy. If the policy is not followed, there's no point in having the policy, and there is a reason to have this policy. You operate by majority decision, and the spokesperson, the board president, reflects the majority opinion of the board, and does the superintendent. So if you have questions, you need to make sure that you're directing them to the president. If journalists call you, if people from your community call you with those questions, again, we'll talk about that in a moment, but particularly with journalists, you need to make sure that you are following that particular piece. There is no conversation that is 100% off the record. Not ever. Just keep that in mind. With parents, and these are your major constituents, obviously. They are the ones with children in the schools. You need to make sure when they reach out to you or you bump into them that you listen, actively listen, that you are accessible, okay? But here's the key piece. You must utilize the chain of command. So when a parent comes to you with a problem with their child or their child's teacher, or a busing issue or a facilities issue, you need to provide them with information around the chain of command. So if a parent calls you and says, my child is having difficulty with their teacher, you need to say, have you spoken to the teacher? If you haven't spoken to the teacher, please make an appointment. If you're not satisfied and with the resolution and speaking with the teacher, talk to the school principal. If you're not satisfied with that resolution at that level, it would then make it to the assistant superintendent in charge of curriculum and instruction, or the next person up the chain. You are not there, nor can you solve those kinds of issues, whether it's a busing problem, whether it's a teacher problem, whether it's a problem in the lunchroom, whether it's an HIB, harassment, intimidation, and bullying concern. You have educational experts. You have employees whose sole role is to handle all of those pieces, okay? And you are not doing a service to the district by trying to solve individual parents' issues or other stakeholders in the process. You know, if a town councilman comes to you and wants you to solve a problem, you should not be carrying any message to another staff member. Board members employ one person in this district, and that's the superintendent. The superintendent holds all other staff accountable for their performance. Now, that all being said, if you hear of a concern out there in the community, your responsibility is to let Dr. McCormack know and to let your board president know. I'm not saying not to let anyone know. The first rule of good board governance, it's not very complicated, it's no surprises. You don't surprise the superintendent, and the superintendent doesn't surprise you. So you should make sure, if you're hearing rumblings out there in the community that the buses are all late and they're not getting here on time, if you hear rumblings out there that the middle school kids can't get through the lunch line in time to eat and get back to class, whatever those kinds of things you are hearing, you need to make sure that you're communicating them to administration, because they are charged with making sure that they're addressed, okay? That's what you need to do as board members. It's really okay to say to a parent, I wish that I could help you, but I can't. But I can give you the resources of where to go to get help. And that's the key. You must be conversant enough with the system to know where to send them. The director of facilities, the director of transportation, the building coordinator, whoever the person is within your district, who is the person who would address those issues. That's the best thing you can do. And I know sometimes we have parents that say, well, I'm afraid, okay? You know, 99.999% of all staff are here because they want to do good things for kids. And parents, are their child's best advocate. And sometimes that means as adults we need to conquer our fear and reach out and have that conversation, those difficult conversations with teachers. Sometimes we hear as parents things we don't want to hear about our kids. It's happened to all of us. It will happen to everyone at one point or another. So you need to encourage them and emphasize the professionalism of the staff because they are indeed professionals. And those parents will be treated professionally. If there's an ongoing problem, again, notify your superintendent so that she's not going to be surprised if it gets to her level. One of the things you can say to people when they call, you can say, if I involve myself at this level and it were to get to the board, because the board is the final arbiter after the failure of all other administrative solutions. But if you involve yourself way down here with the parent when they first call and have an issue, or a community member has an issue, and it gets to the board, you're not going to be able to participate. You're going to have to recuse yourself. So that's something that you can explain. Most parents think that you have a way of solving all of their problems, and you really don't. It's not within your purview, your scope, your legal responsibilities and duties. It would be micromanaging the district. There is no relationship that is more important for the board than the relationship you have with your superintendent. And it is really based, in large part, on developing trust. And that trust takes a time to develop. There is no superintendent that's perfect. If there were, when I did a search, I would have already placed them 1,000 times. They're human, just like everyone else. You were very fortunate to have a very skilled educational leader in this school district. I don't think I have to tell members of the Board of Education, but with a couple of pieces of legislation as well as some regulations around superintendent salary caps, the New Jersey First Law, which requires all district employees, including superintendents, to live in the state of New Jersey within 1 year of employment. We have seen a huge turnover in the ranks of superintendents in the last 3 years. 50% of all superintendents in Bergen and Monmouth County have retired. And that's in large part due to some of these external conditions. From my perspective, the saddest piece about that is that there are a lot of them who left because they felt that they had no choice economically for their families. But they really did love what they were doing, were very successful, had supportive boards, had more to give, wanted to do more, but felt because of their own financial, familial considerations, they had no choice. So we've seen an exodus, really, of educational expertise out of the state in the last several years. So you're very fortunate to have someone who has a very broad background and educational expertise, and you really have that opportunity to build on that as a Board of Education. So I think it's critical to keep in mind, what are the kinds of things that you as a board can do to support a trusting relationship. And the very first, I've already said it and it's repeated, but I think it bears repeating, no surprises. Keep your superintendent always in the loop. Secondarily, respect her educational expertise and her recommendations as she makes them. Thirdly, I think it goes to having honest, difficult conversations. Sometimes with new superintendents in a district, there's a learning curve. Anyone would have that unless they were an internal hire. So I think, occasionally there's going to be perhaps a misstep or two. It's human, but you all have the institutional memory to be able to support the fewest missteps possible through effective communication and having those dialogues and conversations on an ongoing basis with your superintendent. And I think that that's absolutely key to the success. You want to make that successful. When your superintendent is successful, the board is successful. When the board is successful, your superintendent will be successful. And more than that, at the end of the day, the focus will be on the kids where it should be, with closing achievement gaps, with increasing student achievement, with making sure that we are preparing students for 21st century careers that we don't even know what they are yet, okay? I'm old. I remember the days before drive-thrus. Heck, I remember the days before microwaves, before McDonald's. Life continues to change, and it's changing geometrically, not arithmetically. Technology has changed the world, and it's going to continue to change our children's lives in ways we cannot yet imagine. So making sure that we're doing the very best that we can in a fiscally efficient, responsible way, because we do use taxpayer dollars, so we have to be cognizant of that. I'm not saying, just go spend on anything you want. Please don't think for a moment that I believe that would be an effective solution. But I think being fiscally efficient, trying to create a shared vision between the board and the superintendent and the community, which your strategic plan is a wonderful piece to be doing that, to talk about your beliefs. What do you believe the role of the school is? What does excellence in education look like in Montclair? All of those pieces come together in your strategic plan. So it's really just a wonderful vehicle for creating that shared vision. We know through research at the Iowa project that was a longitudinal study that was done by the Iowa School Boards Association looking at effective boards. The boards that are the most effective in improving student achievement are ones that have a shared vision, that understand what their role is, that keep their focus around student and student achievement, that debate issues and not people, that recognize the expertise of their educational leaders, that look at the data, understand the data that comes out from your administration. That's how you can monitor effectively what's going on in your district, is through analyzing the data that is provided to you as a board, whether it's finance statements at the end of the month from your business administrator, whether it's student achievement reports that come back from standardized assessments or formative assessments or district-driven assessments. All of those are the kinds of things that allow you to focus around what you need to do to improve student achievement. And that should be the driving force behind every decision that you make. Okay? Excuse me. In terms of policy, a lot of policy that you will create is policy that is mandated either by federal or state law or the changes thereof. It's important that as a board you constantly look to your policy to make sure that it is being regularly updated. It is a QSAC requirement, New Jersey Quality Single Accountability Continuum, which is the state-driven monitoring system. Keeping that manual up to date, making sure that it reflects current practices in your district, making sure that your policy is flexible enough to accommodate the changes within your district is key to that process. I'm sure you have a policy committee. When I became a board member, and it was not unusual in many boards, the board president would look to the newbies and say, okay, you can be on policy. Because board members would view policy as sort of the Siberia for new board members, sort of a way to sort of exile people from the distance. But I will tell you that your policy committee and making sure that you have policies that reflect the needs of your district and the changes in your district is really critical, and it's probably almost the most important function that a board has. So making sure that you are keeping active in that process, that you are providing for policy and the frameworks for policy is really your job. Now the regulations that are created for implementation of policy is an administrative function. So you create the policy with the intent and the broad guidelines, and then regulations to implement those policies are created by your administration. Okay? Yes?
So in terms of policy, what are best practices that you've seen in terms of do you review them on a regular basis? And how does it work? Is it just new policies that come up? How does that?
Well, I don't know where you are in your policy manual currently, but by now, because of QSAC, which has been in place for the last several years, which requires an updating of the policy manual annually, it actually says that you can do that. Now that would be an impossible task to review every policy annually. So typically, most policies and policy changes will come as requests from administration to address areas that may be changing or anticipated changes. And then what boards of education will typically do is to chunk their reviews of the policy manual. So you might do the 3,000 series one year, you might do the 4,000 series another year, you might do the board bylaws, which are typically in the 9,000 series, in another year. Some districts actually employ a firm to assist them with that process. I don't know if they're here, if you do that. New Jersey School Boards Association also has a policy service that they will work with boards of education. We will actually do a wellness check for your policy manual as part of your dues. So what you would do is to send us your policy manual, one of our policy analysts, and that's all they do all day long. God bless them, I would lose my mind. But that's what they do all day long, is they review policies, they write policies, they analyze policies, they create new policies. They will look at your policy manual and indicate to you where, if any, there are policies that need revised and or updated because of changes in the state law or code or changes to the Fed, like on IDEA, Title I funding, and all of those kinds of pieces of federal grants. And then, as a regular part of that, we send out updates to boards of education. So when there is a change to something that's required, we notify boards of education, and we'll say, here are the changes in statute, here's a sample policy. We maintain a critical policy manual that when you use us for that service, and even now you have access to that at any time with your username and password, you can go on and download any of those critical policies and use those as frameworks and models. Additionally, if you have questions in a particular area and you want to see samples, one of the ones, HIB, school uniforms, we maintain a file of districts that send us their policies, or we do their manuals, so that you could then compare your policy to another policy and then customize it so you get a sense of what other districts across the state are doing in particular areas, not because you want to mirror them, but because you just want that information to make sure that you've covered all of the bases. It's a nice way of not spending time reinventing the wheel. You have enough to do, so that sort of simplifies the process. But you can't do the whole manual in a year. It depends on how your system is set up. Typically, most boards of education have 2 monthly meetings. You have 2 meetings a month. One's a workshop meeting, one's an action meeting. Committee meetings happen in those weeks, off weeks, when you're not having a board meeting, such that the committees can then report out at the work session with any recommendations. So typically, in my experience, the policy committee regularly meets on a monthly basis. But if there is no reason, if there is nothing bubbling up or nothing that needs done, I don't advocate that you meet without having a useful agenda. But again, if you're looking to revise and update your manual, and you're looking at a particular section of the policy manual, you would work on that even if there were no pending policies on the table for you to look at. Okay. Yes? Typically, it goes, I believe, to the business administrator. And that's if you use our policy services to write your policy manual, to update it. Then we routinely send out those updates. Right. Correct. Okay. And we talked a little bit about this. Yes? For the wellness check, that's part of your dues, but to rewrite your policy manual and then to update it on a regular basis is a fee for service. Okay, and that's the difference. But regardless of who does your policy manual, you can send it to us and we will do a wellness check. It's part of your dues. I don't know why every board doesn't take advantage of that, just because it will then provide you with a list of here are the policies that need revised, here's one you may have missed. It's just something that we do as a regular piece of your membership as a Board of Education. Okay? The superintendent can request that you look at policies. You can request that the superintendent look at policies. In the end, though, the Board of Education is responsible for passing policy, and you have the final vote on a policy. So again, you know, you have policy to establish and maintain stability, but I always think that it's helpful for the policy committee to meet regularly just to make sure that you are staying up to date and current, just because things evolve so quickly, okay? And so that policy wellness check is a way for you to do an audit, essentially, of your policy manual to look to see if there are any challenges with it. And I can't imagine at this point, most boards have reviewed their policy manuals several times, mostly because of CUSAC. You would lose points if you didn't do it. So it's happened on a regular basis. Okay? And we've talked really a little bit about all of the pieces to policy, how it's measured, but you on a regular basis should receive information regarding policy. So if a new policy is implemented, and you should talk about how you're going to assess that particular policy. If it's around curriculum and instruction, the superintendent would be determining that. If it were around a board bylaw, that you wanted to change the structure of the board, you wanted to go to committee of the whole from the committee system, or you wanted to go from 2 meetings a month to 1 meeting a month. I know, hard to believe you couldn't, but there are boards that do that, at least in the summer. Then you would do the assessment, because the board bylaws are your responsibilities to assess. But other policies, that assessment of whether they're successful in terms of implementation would be done by administration. You, however, of course, are responsible for your own pieces. Okay? And we talked a little bit about this earlier. If you have a question, if you have a concern around how something is being implemented, around the assessment of a particular program, how something is being measured, it is best to have prescribed protocols, which I believe that you do. You have policy that lays out how you look at this. One of the best ways that you assess is through the superintendent's evaluation. The Board of Education is responsible on an annual basis for evaluating the superintendent by April 30th of every year. That date is particularly challenging now with the switch of board elections in all but 41 districts in the state of New Jersey, with the exception, of course, of those appointed boards, which have a different reorg date and so forth, and you do have a different reorg date. But for elected boards this year, it was very problematic for that April 30th date. You had new board members who were elected in November. They took their seats in January, and then they had to evaluate the superintendent by April the 30th. So as part of Achieve New Jersey, which is the teacher evaluation model, and you may think that that's really, I'm off topic, but I'm not. As part of the regulations for implementation of Achieve, they are moving the superintendent evaluation regulation model requirements to the teacher evaluation, principal evaluation model in Achieve NJ. And we had a wonderful opportunity because the state board, as you know, was taking comment on those regulations to go down the street and to talk to the DOE directly about not only the teacher and principal evaluation regulations, which we had some questions about on behalf of boards, but also the superintendent evaluation. So we said, would you please consider altering that date? So we are hopeful that that date may migrate to later in the year beyond April 30th. July 1 is by statute the time frame for the beginning and end of a superintendent contract year. So that seemed like a very appropriate date, especially with the implementation of merit pay for superintendents who are capped. So stay tuned. I'm very hopeful that that date and that deadline will change. It would change for you as well, in spite of the fact that you reorg at a different time and so forth. But it would be a real benefit to boards all across the state, because that is one of your most important responsibilities as a board member, one of the most important roles you can serve, and it should be done very thoughtfully and very carefully so that you're really reflecting an annual evaluation, in other words, a full year. I know that as a staff member, I would not want someone evaluating me, who I worked with for 6 weeks between January, and April. New board members really don't have a good sense in that very short period of time of the totality of what the job involves or all of the accomplishments that have happened over the year. I have trouble with last week, much less going back to last July. So, or April, whenever the board year started, we would have said it started in April of 2012. But with the change of the election this year, everything sort of shifted. So I think that's key. It's an annual evaluation. You're looking at 12 months worth of work, not just what happened at last week's board meeting. And so doing that thoughtfully and carefully is a very key component of your role as a board member, and I think it's important to remember that. Your job always is to reflect back to the superintendent those kinds of concerns and issues. It will help this superintendent to be able to be more effective. If she is hearing what's going on out there in your community, keep in mind you are appointed to reflect your community. You are a trustee of that, but your primary constituency, and I've had board members argue with me, they always lose. Your primary constituency is the children in this community. They are the ones without a voice. Everybody else has a voice. The Teachers Association has a voice. Staff members have a voice. Superintendent has a voice. Everyone has a voice. The voters have a voice. They elect people that appoint you. They cannot elect the people that appoint you, but the children don't have a voice. So board members really must keep in mind that you are the voice of the children. I had a very wise assistant superintendent in my district at one time who said when she was a teacher, she went to a board meeting and the superintendent put a chair right in front of the Board of Education, and then he had one of his own children come and sit right in front. He lived in town. Sit right in front of the, you could only do it if it was your own kid, right? Sit in front of the Board of Education just to remind the board that what you do impacts children. And sometimes we forget that that's what we're doing, that that's why we're here, especially when passions sometimes get a little high. It helps to remember that what you do directly impacts the children of your community. And your responsibility is to every child in this community, not to the band parents or the lacrosse parents or the GMT parents or the special education advocacy group. It's to represent every child equally and equitably. And equitably does not mean every group gets the same number of dollars. Equity means that there's the opportunities that are shared across the district so that every child reaches his or her potential. And there are different needs for different kinds of kids, and there are different needs in different schools. So, some schools may get more funding than another school, which might get a little less funding, depending on the needs of the student body, depending upon how much technology one school has versus another school, to make sure that they have access to the kinds of tools they all need to have to be successful. Your administration will solve the constituent issues as long as they are aware of them, which is why it's so key for all of you to stay in touch and to communicate effectively. And you certainly can hold the superintendent accountable for making sure that when there are issues among constituents that they get addressed. You don't want to be in a position of micromanaging the district. Okay? Micromanagement only happens when the board allows it to happen. Boards of education need to police themselves and to make sure that they're not crossing that line in the day-to-day administration. In the old days, I will tell you, the old days, I've been off my board now close to 20 years, but in the old days, there were some superintendents that really believed that if they let you muck around in the weeds, and you were more worried about picking out the tile for the foyer of the new building, that you would be less likely to get in trouble doing other kinds of things, okay? That wasn't a good idea. It's not your responsibility to be picking out, the terrazzo for the foyer of the new building, or the addition, or the colors, or the carpet, or any of that. Your role is not books and bricks and buses. It's not, and budgets. You should set parameters for the budget with your administration, okay, to ensure that you are getting the best educational buck for every dollar spent. But those are not your jobs. That's administration's job. That's the construction manager's job. That's the architect's job. That's the superintendent's job, the principal's job. Those are not your job. You say what you want to see done. Construct a new building that'll have the kinds of facilities that will provide for STEM education into the 21st century for our students. Redo the science labs so that they can support the kinds of curriculum that we need to have in place. Okay? That's your role, to say this is what we want to see happen. And your administration will make that happen within the constraints of the budget and all of the other kinds of mandates and projects that are going on at any given time. That's why it's so key to set annually board goals collaboratively so that you are reflecting the vision that your community has for its children to make sure that they are prepared for the future. Okay? Sometimes boards micromanage because parents really want you to do that. They want their problem solved with one phone call. Sometimes it happens because board members think if they don't do it, no one will do it or get it done. That's pretty egocentric, quite frankly. We have people who are in this district on a full-time, daily basis, whose job it is to see that it gets done. And you all have, last I checked, personal lives, professional careers, family, and other kinds of obligations. You don't really have the time to be doing it. And superintendents who don't raise that issue when it happens, when you cross the line, invite micromanagement. So I always say to my superintendents, if the board begins to cross the line, you have to say stop. Simply stop. There's no reason for any board member to be having conversations with principals or supervisors or directors. You talk, you employ one person, and that's the superintendent. Only the full board can direct a member of the staff to undertake an activity, and that's only through the superintendent. No member of the staff, including the superintendent, is required to act because you as an individual board member asked them to do that. There's a huge cost in a district if all 7 of you have the superintendent doing a different piece. You might decide that you want a study of the gifted and talented program, and another board member might want to see what the co-curricular participation rate is, because we know that students who participate more actively in school programs tend to have higher student achievement. So you want to look at that metric. And then another one of you wants to look at, what's the dropout rate look like? Is it going up? Is it going down? And if all 7 of you ask the superintendent to undertake a different study, the superintendent would be spending all of her time answering the 7 of you. That's why only upon the collective decision of the board will the superintendent act and take action. So if all 7 of you, or a majority of the 7 of you, decide that you want to look at participation in co-curricular activities, or if you want a survey to determine how school culture is in a particular building, then the superintendent will undertake that. But keep in mind, that the primary focus should be on the goals you have decided for annually, and that those should drive the work of the committees of the board. They should drive all of your work for the full board year. And every time you add something else to the plate, something else has to come off, or something else takes a back seat. So you need to be very thoughtful about how you set those goals together, okay? I will also tell you that board members need to police boards. While the superintendent may need to say stop, the board itself needs to make sure that you are following all of the best practices in terms of good board governance. When I was a board member, one of the things that I was always the most proud of is that you are, and we were, and you are now, the largest group of unpaid governmental officials who, at one time voluntarily, now it's in the law, subscribe to a code of ethics that outline how you are going to behave and agree to abide by that. You know, if you begin to micromanage, you run the danger of violating the school board member code of ethics. And that's certainly something that you don't want to find yourself in that conundrum. It is not a good place to be. So by responding appropriately, by maintaining your role where you are supposed to be, you will ensure not only that your district focus is around improving student achievement, you will also ensure that the district is well run, because that's your job, to see that it is well run through oversight. And if you need, or you're not comfortable that you don't have sufficient information for that oversight function, then as a board, you need to collectively decide what is it we need to be comfortable that we are being managed effectively. That's your responsibility. You get those financials every month. Most boards are very comfortable in reviewing those and saying, okay, you know, we can certify that we are in a good place financially. We haven't overexpended any line item in our budget. But there are other pieces to your oversight that you might be less sure of. If that's the case, you need to sit down and talk with the superintendent and say, what kind of data can you give us so that we can feel comfortable that we are fulfilling our oversight responsibility, whether it's in the area of personnel, whether it's in the area of recruiting and retaining high-quality staff, all of those particular pieces. And personnel is a particularly thorny issue for a lot of boards, but you are responsible for ensuring that the superintendent has in place processes and procedures to hire and retain the highest quality staff. But you are not there to do or involve yourself in those actual processes. So there are certain questions that are completely appropriate around process so that you do have oversight in terms of personnel. You know, how many people, depending upon the position, how many people applied, who was involved in the interview process, how many candidates were brought in first round, how many were returned second round. When the superintendent makes a recommendation to the board, you're perfectly well within your rights to say, why is this person the very best individual for this position? How do they work well with other people within our system? What skill set do they bring to this particular job that makes them the very best candidate? But you're going to hold your superintendent accountable at the annual evaluation for recruiting and retaining high-quality personnel. You are not going to be involving yourself in the day-to-day operations of the district, which is the hiring and recruiting process for personnel in your school district. And sometimes that's a little bit of a tough line to maintain, but it is imperative. You hold the superintendent accountable for their performance. Board members said to me, well, how do we know? And I say, well, you know, look at the number of individuals that are hired in a given year that are retained and recommended for reemployment. If you saw that less than 50% of new hires were retained for second-year employment, then you might have cause to say, this is an issue we need to sit down and discuss further. So you can look at those pieces in that May time frame when you begin to renew. The board can only hire someone who has the affirmative recommendation of the superintendent, which means that the board can never hire someone that does not have the recommendation of the superintendent. So it really does provide a framework for the board in the area of personnel. Okay? So, yes. I have to tell you, I'm pretty unclear as to why you even have a personnel committee. Most boards of education do not have a personnel committee because they really do not have an active role in the area of personnel. Personnel, if they do have that committee, is generally, it's another name for the negotiations committee. So that when you are negotiating a bargaining agreement, that is your function. So you would work with your administration and the board in setting parameters for the contract, in looking at what kinds of things you would like to have in the next contract, and then for actually engaging in the negotiations with the bargaining unit. Because the full Board of Education has to approve all recommendations for reemployment, or any other kind of personnel piece the full board's going to be involved in. So many boards have really determined that there's not a sufficient enough agenda of responsibilities to have a specific board committee designated solely for that. And so most of their negotiations committees are ad hoc. In other words, the negotiation committee only works in the years in which there's a contract to negotiate, and when they don't, there's no negotiation committee meetings. Again, there's no point in meeting if you're not negotiating a contract. But most boards no longer maintain a personnel committee, and we would tell you that from our standpoint as an association, that in terms of best practices, it's really not necessary, and it really does wind it is almost impossible not to wander into that administrative function by virtue of having it, because the role of the board in personnel is so very limited. The full board evaluates the superintendent, except for those members who might be conflicted out by virtue of having a family member employed in the district, and I don't think you have anyone on your board in that circumstance. And so the full board is going to participate in that process, and that is really your role in the personnel process, is to evaluate the superintendent. Yes, sir.
Different committees that we have sort of preliminarily may do the work of the entire board in order to spread out, so that not everybody has to do everything, so that they would get the information, let's say as to a promotion or not, and then sort of digest that and relay it to the other board. Is that not a best practice, or?
If it's something that your district has done historically over time and you wish to continue, you certainly can. Again, most personnel items are closed session items and need to remain confidential, so the full board would be hearing that committee report at a closed session. It would seem to me to be just as easy to have your administration report out on those matters as it is to have a committee. Committees can only recommend, and in that instance, the committee can recommend, and if the superintendent doesn't have the same recommendation, then you have set up a juxtaposition that is untenable, since people can only be employed or re-employed upon the affirmative recommendation of the superintendent. Now, all committees, if they're functioning appropriately, do the legwork in policy, in facilities, in finance, in curriculum and instruction, or teaching and learning, whatever you call your committee, because different boards call them different things. Those committees make recommendations to the full Board of Education, and then all of those items can be discussed in open public, which is the most significant difference between a personnel committee and all of those other committees. And hence, that's one of the reasons that it doesn't really seem to be as useful for boards as some of the other committees. I don't know if that responds adequately to your question. Some boards have had a long-standing history of having that committee. I'm not telling you it's not legal. You can have it. It's that very often it doesn't do enough to really sustain itself. It doesn't meet regularly. It's one more night out for board members. If that committee did not exist, board members might have an opportunity to serve on other committees that they have an interest in that might be more productive in terms of getting through the board agenda and board business. So it's just something to think about. Other questions? And we've talked about this. We've talked about the fact that you're going to be monitoring and that there are all different ways to monitor assessments. And you can question what the administrative systems that are in place are, and if you think there's a shortfall in that particular piece, you certainly can communicate that to the superintendent to make sure that all of those administrative systems that are in place are effective and meeting the needs of the students, the staff, and the community. Okay. You should always understand how your system is structured, the processes that are in place, how you make decisions, what the performance measures are for all aspects of your district. But here's a key, and that is board members have a responsibility to ask questions. If you don't know why something is done, if you haven't had an explanation, or you're a new board member and you would like to know why something exists, then ask those questions. You get an agenda and there's something on the agenda that you don't understand or you weren't aware of. You know, you have a couple of choices. You could call the committee chair if it's in a committee report and say, why is the curriculum committee recommending X? If you don't want to speak with the committee chair, you could always call the superintendent. The superintendent might then direct you to speak with another staff member. For example, if you have an assistant superintendent who's handling curriculum and is the liaison to that committee, she might say, call this person and speak with them. They can give you a more detailed response. If it was a finance question, your superintendent might say, speak with the business administrator. He can check and give you those, expenditures that you have questions about. But you should ask those questions and ask them ahead of time so that everyone has an opportunity to respond and to come to a meeting prepared to respond to questions. If you have a question as a board member, other members might have that very same question. So by asking it, you allow your administration to be more prepared to respond to those questions. And so that's your obligation as a board member. Do your homework, read your packet. You can tell I'm an old board member. They used to get delivered. Now most of it's electronic. I still call it a packet. And there's an old wives' tale. It's an old war story, but I actually know the board president that did this. She got so annoyed in the old days that board members would walk into a board meeting without having opened their packet that she took and she stuffed it with a lot of metallic confetti, the kind that when you pull out goes everywhere, like that you would put on a table at a party. Well, there were several board members that evening that opened their packets and the confetti went everywhere. Those board members never came to another board meeting without having at least opened and checked their packet for the confetti. She liked to think they'd read it all. I think they just looked for the confetti. So you need to make sure you are doing your homework and asking those questions ahead of time, giving your administration the opportunity to come back to you and provide that. You can then ask the question at the board table if you think it's important that your community hear you. Again, it's not about board members all agreeing all of the time. No one expects that. Again, there is collective wisdom in 7 different viewpoints and perspectives, but you do want to be able to have the information you need to make the very best decision possible. So if there's more information you need in order to make that decision, give everybody a heads up, let your superintendent know, let your board president know, or call the committee chair so that you get the information you need to make your very best informed decision. And it still may not agree with other board members, and that's okay. Just remember to disagree on issues and not each other, because it's not personal. Okay? It's about doing what's best for kids at the end of the day. And we may have very different perspectives on what that looks like. And it's okay to have that different perspective. We just need to treat each other with professionalism and respect as we work through those differences. So debate issues, but not people. I'm not going to, this is all on the PowerPoint. We've talked a lot about it, about a lot of the different kinds of data and systems that are in place. I think it's important, especially for new board members to know that in the last couple of years, the last 2 years, we have seen significant changes in education across the state of New Jersey that ultimately are going to provide you with some wonderful tools to be more effective as boards of education. But they are truly sea changes in the way we approach our work. The new teacher evaluation model and principal evaluation model that is directly tied to student performance is a sea change. It's going to require extraordinary amounts of administrative time for the coming year. It's going to require ongoing professional development for both your supervisory staff, who will be doing the evaluations, as well as the teaching staff, in order to be able to understand and be comfortable with that. In 2014-15, we're going to see the rollout of PARC, the Partnership of Assessments of Readiness for College and Careers. It is a new testing system that's going to replace the New Jersey Ask assessments. The exciting piece to that is we'll get feedback in live time. I'm told, and I'm hoping that it's correct, although we'll wait and see, that when students take assessments, you'll get that data back in 2 weeks. Now, what's really exciting about that, the old teacher in me, is that we will actually have information around student knowledge and skills in live time during the course of the year. So if I can identify, through item analysis of that assessment, that a couple of my kids missed fractions or a couple of kids missed understanding integers, I can go back, differentiate my instruction, and make sure I brought those kids up to grade level, up to speed, right then and there. Because in June, it's too late. And in October, when we get the New Jersey Ask test back, not only is it too late, it's ridiculously too late. It does nothing to inform student placement. It does nothing to inform staff placement. So this is a really exciting opportunity. That's the really exciting upside of it. The more challenging piece of it is that it's all going to be on computers. So it speaks to bandwidth. It speaks to having the hardware and the software necessary. So this is going to be, and I'm sure your district has already begun those preparations, but they're going to be ongoing preparations to implement that, because that's supposedly going to roll out in September of 2014. We had the adoption in 2010 of the Common Core, replacing the New Jersey curriculum content core standards with the new national core. So that's a whole different curriculum. So your staff's been very busy writing and implementing that. As part of the Achieve, which is the teacher evaluation model, every teacher at a non-tested grade and subject has to create SGOs, student growth objectives. So they're going to have to look at how we measure student achievement and progress over the course of a year. So that's a real challenge, to make sure that we're creating SGOs that are reliable and valid and rigorous and relevant. So this year is going to be a year of extraordinary hard work for your administration, for you as boards. But at the end of the day, we will have lots of tools at our fingertips that really will improve education for kids. So I would encourage you, if you have questions, call us, call me, call my colleagues. For those of you who are new, we have a legal department, we have a policy department, we have a governmental relations department that can advocate for laws that are good for public education. We have a labor relations department that can provide you with information around what the latest settlements are across the state, what are the kinds of things that boards are getting into their contracts that will improve teacher or expand teacher contact time, or allow for more flexible scheduling of buildings to better meet the needs of students. So we are there, we are a professional organization, we are delighted to help. And I would like to stop talking and ask you if you have specific questions that I can respond to that I haven't addressed. Because like most teachers, I can talk forever. Yes, you can. Go up there. Questions? Absolutely.
Thank you. It's a lot of information. It's a lot to process. At this time, board members can ask questions, but also if members of the public have questions, I would appreciate if you would come to this mic so that they'll be able to hear it on the
question about communication. It's always a challenge. As you can see, people don't come to board meetings. Luckily, we have it taped. But what have you seen throughout your experience with going through New Jersey? I mean, there's so much change going on. There's so much coming down from the state in terms of, everything. And it is a little overwhelming for everybody. So how have you seen this message get out effectively?
Well, I think it's an area where boards continue to work and to struggle, and they'll say, well, no one comes to our meetings. So I think taping them, having them available, I think using multiple modalities to communicate with your community is a good idea, whether it's, and I never thought I'd live long enough to say this, but social media is one way to do that, through Facebook, through Twitter, newsletters, information on your website that's updated to reflect those changes, taking and putting informational PowerPoints, for example, around curriculum and instruction, or changing expectations for students, and put as much as you can on your website, make it as easy to navigate as you possibly can. If you can scrape together the money, and for a lot of districts, it was one of the first things to go, was that newsletter out to parents and to community members, because there was a cost inherent in that. The website does allow you to do that same thing in a more economical way, but again, some people aren't technologically comfortable. They might not go to your website. That does require effort, whereas something that comes home in a backpack or into your mailbox is sort of right in front of you. So that's a piece. So I think we used to take our board show on the road, is what I used to call it. Very often, a lot of boards will hold a board meeting in a different school every month. Now, there are upsides to that, and there are downsides to that. I think making sure that at least once a month, every other month, that you have a student presentation with a particular group of students, whether it's mock trial or forensics, or it's elementary kids part of the choir or the magic singers, or winners of science fairs, or any of those kinds of pieces. It doesn't bring everyone out. It will bring some parents out. They will remember that you recognize their kids. It's also a way just to be able to share more information. Some will leave right away, some will stay, but I think as many ways as you can find to engage the community. I think as board members, having a board member at every single back to school night is a critical component. I don't mean they want to sit and listen to you speak, as long as you have sat here as very politely and listened to me, because what they really want to do is to see their child's teacher, and that's what they should do. But having a table that says Board of Education, having brochures, having information available, and being able to put a face to a name as a board member, I think is key. Again, being at as many public events as you possibly can. Again, as a way of saying, we are here as board members, we want to hear from you, we support the district. That's the best way, tried and true that I know, is to try to hit as many of those pieces as you can. We cannot give up. And the change is happening so fast, it's hard for boards to keep up, and you are intimately involved in all of that. And so you're aware of it, but most people out there in the community really are not. So the more you can talk about it at the board table, the more you can discuss it, the more you have information available at the various schools and the school offices that talk about it. Pick up a brochure, pick up information, any place that you know they're going to go, the public library, other places where people congregate and you have a way of displaying information or having it available. I think that's a wonderful piece. At town hall, at your public library, and any place else in your community where people would congregate would be a wonderful thing as well. Just to get that message out, because there is a lot of change and it is going to continue to be challenging. I don't think it's going to get simpler. I think it's going to get crazier before it gets simpler. In a good way, because at the end of the day, we are going to be able to be more effective with our kids by virtue of these initiatives. It's just that they're coming sort of like a freight train as opposed to slowly and carefully, and that has made it challenging.
So, I'm going to do more equipment, and I feel like I just came to church with preachers talk, and I feel like they're talking directly to me.
Oh,
And so I kind of like want to shy down when they, they give you a thing, in a good way.
oh, I hope in a good way. I don't know you.
Yeah, in a good way. I like my ministry.
Oh,
So, but I do have a question in terms of, so I'm sorry, I'm too loud. I'm excited. So your organization is a group that we can come to for advice and suggestions on when we do things right, when we're doing things wrong. So basically, if I make a mistake and I'm in front of you, you're not going to kick me off.
no, I have no authority to kick you off. There does exist the SEC, which when I taught high school social studies, I was sure was the Securities Exchange Commission. But when I became a board member in New Jersey, I found out it was the School Ethics Commission. The School Ethics Commission does have the ability to remove a board member, to suspend them, to censure them, or to reprimand them if someone files an ethics complaint against them for having violated the Code of Ethics. And there's an entire process that they go through. When board members call me with a question or a concern, every single one of our staff signs the Code of Ethics, signs a financial disclosure form, and I live by the Code of Ethics the same way that you do as a board member. So if you call me and you have a question or a concern, it is confidential. I don't share it with your superintendent, I don't share it with your board president, or any member of the board. It's as if you and I are in closed session alone. And I will give you an honest take and as best an answer as I can give you. If I don't have the answer, I might direct you to a policy person, or I might, send you to labor relations or our advocacy people, or whoever is appropriate. Or if you want, I'll get the answer and get it back to you so that you don't have to do more legwork. But you are always, that's what I spend my days, my 9 to 4 or 5 during the day doing, is talking to board members from my districts who have questions or concerns.
So you're my resource.
I am your resource.
I have a question.
Please.
Related to, I understand that we have only any authority in the context of us in session and as a collective body. At the same time, how do you balance that collective authority with the obligations of an individual to fulfilling your standard of care, towards your obligations to the community and, to the children? You understand? So you said, as an entity, you don't want to overwhelm the superintendent with individual requests, you want to go to the board. At the same time, how do you ensure that as an individual, you're still held responsible as an individual to the State Ethics Commission, that you are operating appropriately and fulfilling your standard of care in this seat?
You do that through a collective discussion around those administrative processes that monitor and provide you with information in your oversight capacity. So if I'm understanding your question, you're saying that you as an individual need additional information to feel that you have done your due diligence in terms of providing adequate oversight, then you need to talk with your fellow board members and superintendent about what it is you specifically need to feel comfortable. And then the board needs to come to an agreement. The district carries E&O insurance, okay, just to make you all feel better, errors and omissions. So, if there was a difficulty in something that you did as a full board or individually in the context of the board's operations, you are indemnified. So you have no personal liability as long as it's within the confines of your board responsibilities and your appropriate role. Now, if you go outside of that role, you are not necessarily indemnified. And let me give you a really extreme example. I had a board member once who was also a parent, and some of you are probably parents who have children still in the schools, went to a basketball game, felt that the coach hadn't sufficiently recognized the extraordinary talent that his child had on the court, and had not given him or provided his son with sufficient playing time in the course of a game. Took a swing at the coach. Needless to say, the individual was not indemnified as a board member for that behavior, because that was not in his role as a board member. He was acting as as a parent independently. So after he was subjected to criminal complaint from the coach for assault and battery, and then sued by the coach for physical harm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was also then ultimately the ethics complaint, because the SEC will not hear a complaint that is being adjudicated in a different judicial jurisdiction, either civil or criminal cases. They'll only hear pieces that are not there. So those had to be resolved first, and then at the end, it got to there, and then that person was removed. So you were indemnified through E&O errors and omissions insurance in your school district, but only for those actions as a board member. So if inadvertently something got past you in spite of your best due diligence and you approved it, you have no personal liability as a board member.
I understand that.
Well, but I think it's important for the whole board to understand that. So if there are areas of oversight that you do not feel comfortable when you are approving things, that there's not sufficient understanding of those systems that are in place, then that's something that needs to be on the agenda for a full board discussion so that everyone can and will be comfortable. But those processes are only altered when the full board determines that they need to be altered. An individual board member cannot, again, have the superintendent delivering multiple levels of reports just so that one individual board member has a greater level of comfort than is required by the full board.
So anyone from the public? I think there's someone that has a question.
Can I ask a real quick question though? And I'm on a policy committee, and one of the things that you said was that you guys, what is your fee for writing policy? If we were to come to you and ask.
I can get you that information. I apologize. I do not have it off the top of my head. I think that I recall what it is, but I don't want to mislead you because it's not my area of expertise. But it is information I can get back to your board very quickly.
Thank you very much for that presentation. As a parent, I think it's actually very important to
Could you give your name and address, please?
Yes, I am Regina Tuma, and I am at 12 South Mountain Avenue in Montclair. I want to get back to some of the points that were discussed here, and clearly, on the one hand, as a parent, I'm very interested in what was said, but as a parent, it also left me a bit disconcerted. And the question that I have is, going back to an earlier point, about what is the role of the board in kind of listening and conveying the aspirations of the community. I know that we're talking about a lot of changes that are going on. There are a lot of people in this community, and these a lot of these changes are coming from the state and the federal government. But I think to not discuss what's going on out there in various communities in the United States is to also ignore yet another reality. That is that parents, communities are turning against these changes that are being imposed by states, Common Core. All these things are being questioned. So when the board says, well, people don't show up to board meetings, and for many reasons. It could be jobs, it could be childcare, but I assure you that there is a strong community in Montclair that has a lot of questions, that are actually opposed to the changes and vision that is being implemented by this board. A lot of us feel, and you're right about social media, the conversations are going on, we're all connected. And my concern is that it might be the board that is not connected. And so I guess my question to you, this is all great when you have to implement policy. I'm an educator, I'm part of all these boards, colleges, and all of this I understand. But what is the responsibility of the board when there is a true rift in the community, where the community disagrees with the testing, the curriculum, where the community feels that what is being implemented it's a gutting of the very values that we feel are important in Montclair. And so how can you help the board and the community, and how can there be, and how can we foster that discussion between the community and the board? Because in some sense I feel that what we're going to be implementing here is something that we have to, but it's almost like the past, because the future is ahead of us, and the future is that a lot of school boards, federal governments, introducing bills that are curtailing all this stuff. The discussion is happening, and so how can we, it almost makes me feel like we need to reclaim our schools here in Montclair.
Could we I have just a suggestion, if you don't mind. Why don't you let her answer the question? Because I think we've got, I mean, I certainly have the idea of what you're asking. So when?
You know, I think that is the huge challenge, and I think there are a lot of communities who have those very same kinds of questions. There are a lot of communities, and I am aware and know that there are states that are looking at taking, rescinding their approval of the Common Core. I know that there are growing grassroots organizations, especially of educators who are keeping their students home during standardized testing, that there is a sense that we have swung too far, perhaps in the other direction around accountability, and that we are losing what is most crucial to many parents, which is to educate the whole child. And I will tell you that those concerns get expressed rather regularly at board meetings by community members, by board members as well. You know, as a former teacher, you know, I share some of those same concerns. You know, I taught American government, so, you know, there are always events going on. So the inauguration, for example, I would have typically stopped and talked about presidential politics. I would have talked about inaugurations and those pieces. When the Pope died and we elected, I taught world cultures and European history. We would have stopped and talked about the papacy and its transformation into the 21st century. So I think those are very common concerns on one hand. On the other hand, we also know that we are not making sure that every child reaches his or her potential. We have not been 100% successful in that regard. So I know that a lot of these are mandates that boards of education are required to implement, and they have some downsides, they have some upsides. I'm hopeful, and this is probably not a great answer or one that will answer either side particularly well, but I think as any time, and maybe I'll go back to my history piece, and that is, if you look at the study of every revolution, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, you have a period of great conservatism that follows a revolution. You know, it's like the pendulum, the French Revolution, you had the Reign of Terror that followed the beheading of the King of France and the overthrow of the monarchy. You then went into the Reign of Terror, which was a great response to that. And eventually, you know, it moved back towards center. And I'm very hopeful that as these changes evolve, that there will be individuals who raise those questions that I think are so key to keeping fundamentally what makes American education wonderful, what has made New Jersey education wonderful. I have 4 kids, I have 4 grandkids, all 4 of my kids are graduates of New Jersey schools. They're all employed with health benefits, so I feel like I am free and clear. I'm very proud of their accomplishments. But I will tell you that I also think that this is an ongoing debate, both nationally and locally, at local boards and at the state level, around where we shake out on this. And I think eventually the pendulum is going to move back toward the middle, which may be a very good thing. But in the meantime, I think boards need to continue to move forward and have that ongoing dialogue with their community and find as many creative ways as we can I know that this board and every board across the state want students who are empathetic, who are good citizens, who will give back to the community, who are able to be team players, who can collaborate, who can think analytically, who can read and interpret all kinds of information, that have a focus not only on informational text, but on great literature as well. So again, you know, I'm aware, for example, that in the Common Core, there's a real shift between literature and informational reading. Well, that's fine. Those things are the minimums, they're not the maximums. And so for a lot of districts, we're going to do both. We're going to continue with the great literature as well as the informational pieces. Understanding that the Common Core really came out of a business focus around graduating students who are prepared to go into the workforce as well as into college. So I think there's no one simple, easy answer, but I think your board, in doing their strategic plan, is reaching out to the community. They want to hear what you have to think, what you believe, so that they can indeed reflect the aspirations of your community for your kids, but at the same time, they also have to comply with what's law and regulation and what the expectation is at the state and the federal level. Those are sort of the parameters and the framework within they have to work. And so it is, and that's one of the reasons I have said to your board, these are very challenging times, because it's trying to do that balance, that juggle to maintain those really fundamental pieces that make education in New Jersey such a quality product. I mean, it really is.
So this may be, well, I think this is going to be a bit of a better question, but just to be perfectly clear. Does any board of education in the state of New Jersey have the authority not to implement the Common Core?
No.
Or change the time frame of its implementation?
No.
And I think we have to remember too, you know, who we are as Montclair and as a school district. And this is a community that embraces the whole child. And we support the arts, and we support, you know, athletics and all the other things that go beyond just the, you know, the basic academics.
And even the New Jersey core content curriculum standards devised by New Jersey, I like to think of them as the floor, not the ceiling. And in a district like Montclair, you're moving toward the ceiling, not the basement, okay? Not the floor. You're moving up. So they are the minimums, not the maximums. And I would say this very same thing about the Common Core. They are the floor, not the ceiling. And I think in a district of this caliber, you are providing that balance. You're striving to continue to provide that balance, the well-rounded education, recognizing that, you know, second only to the quality of instruction is school climate in terms of student achievement and making sure that you have a safe climate for every child to go to school in. And I don't mean just safe, you know, from outsiders. I mean a safe, trusting culture that supports students taking risks in their learning, you know, students being stretched to reach their potential, you know, and that you recognize that having a broad-based co-curricular program, I don't say extracurricular, I say co-curricular, because to me it's as fundamental to a well-rounded education as what takes place in the classroom. And in fact, if you look at college admissions, a better predictor than SAT scores is the rate of student participation in co-curriculars. Those students who are more active in their school district tend to be admitted to higher quality schools and then to maintain enrollment. It doesn't matter if you got into Harvard, if you can't stay there, it doesn't matter. So having students who participate greatly is a better indicator of college success than the SAT score, which is a long-term standardized assessment. So, you know, I think these things take time. Again, I think it's a very challenging time for board members. It's not gratuitous when I say I really admire your courage in what you are doing, but know that you do make a difference every day in the lives of the children in your community, and not everyone out in your community is going to agree with the decisions you make, but we do the very best that we can. And I know you're doing the very best that you can to maintain that commitment to educating the whole child, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in athletics, whether it's in academics. Because at the end of the day, we want every child to go out and to be able to be a contributing citizen to the global community that they're going to live in. Not just New Jersey, but globally, because that's where we are at this point in time. So they need to not just compete against citizens in New Jersey for jobs, or, you know, the tri-state area, or nationally. It's international. We live in a global world today. So I'm not sure that that really responds to all of your community's inquiries, but I do believe that that is the challenge for all boards, and that's to maintain those quality pieces while being in compliance and picking those very best pieces from those initiatives and taking advantage of them. And I think that's the trick. That's the answer. But it's going to be a challenge. Thank you. You're welcome.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Ilana Halberstadt. I live at 6 Amelia Street here in Montclair. Thank you for your presentation and answering questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I have 1,000 questions. I can't ask all of them, I understand that, but I am compelled to speak right now on behalf of my child, who's my only son, who I do everything for. And this strategic plan is not good enough for my son. It's not good enough for the town of Montclair. It has nothing to do with what the people of Montclair are about. I would like to see the Board of Education of Montclair pass a resolution against high-stakes testing. I would like us to take a page from the protesters in Albany on Saturday. The speaker, Nikhil Goyal, who is 17, 18 years old, with a crowd of 10,000 people, to take back public education. I, myself, my child is going into first grade next year. My child is not going to be taking any standardized tests. My child is not going to be taking any assessments. When I heard the tripod survey was happening, I wrote my principal a letter, because we have a wonderful communication system right now with the school that my son attends. Every time I have a problem or a question, I go to the teacher responds to me. If I need somebody else, they pass me on to somebody else. Wonderful communication, wonderful school. Great teachers doing something with not enough money, with not enough resources, with not enough staffing. My child is going to the school with the biggest teacher-student ratio in town. There was $95,000 spent on a tripod survey that could have gone to get teachers, aides. There's musical instruments sitting right now in my son's school that for the past year, and when I did the tours 2 years in a row, I did all the tours, and they showed me the equipment. Look at what your son is going to be learning on. And I found out a few months ago, and I sent you all a letter, and I got auto replies from everybody about what with the budget and the money, and I feel like money is going to the wrong places, and we're talking about testing, and the high school students are stressed out. I urge you all to find Nikhil Goyal's speech online and read it. We're talking about a revolution. There's going to be a revolution in Montclair, because there are a lot of people here who are not okay with this plan. Not okay with this plan. I have nightmares about what is going to be happening in our school. I have emails from parents. I have information from all sorts of sources that our literature at the high school, starting in the fall, is going to be cut by 50% and is going to be informational texts. We don't know what those texts are going to be. I have information that the small student learning communities at Montclair High School are in jeopardy and in danger. That
I'm sorry. I'm going to take prerogative here.
Okay, thank you for your time for listening. I appreciate that was probably more than 3 minutes, and I thank you for listening. I'll go back to my seat now then if you're done. Okay, thank you so much for listening, everybody.
name's Marcellus de Medeiros. I live on 15 Mountain View Place. I'm sorry I was late tonight, and I might say things that you might have went over already, but Glenfield Middle School had a wonderful event tonight. The what is that, the G-Force Club? G-Force Club? Yes. What's your teacher's name? I'm sorry, Miss Washington. She had a wonderful event tonight, and I didn't even know it was going to take so long, but it took a long time. But I wanted to come here and speak about how offended I was last week when Mr. Rosenblum, I'm sorry, did I say your name right? Yeah. That's okay. Spoke on the raging debate on education reform, and he titled it Education Reformers versus People Who Think the Reformers are Teacher Bashers. And I listened to the video over and over again, so that's what you said. It was education reformers versus people who think they're teacher bashers. That's not what this is about. This is not about education, me thinking education reformers are teacher bashers. This is about me wanting my child to be educated properly and serviced properly. I worked in Patterson now for 13 years, and for the past 5 years, I've watched plans being implemented that are very similar to Dr. McCormick, and the children are miserable. Okay, they're miserable. So you sit up there and you speak on things, and they're not even correct. That's not what this is about. This is not about me thinking they're teacher bashers. The facts are, we have a superintendent who comes from a foundation who gets manuals on how to close schools.
Excuse me.
No.
Excuse me.
And we have board members who are affiliated with charter schools. Those are facts. And also, I would like to know why we don't have an independent investigation. Everybody has their own opinion as to who's responsible for what happened, and nothing's going to change. But why don't we find out what happened so we can make sure our kids are safe?
Marcella, I'm going to ask you to stop now. Thank you.
That's why I feel like my son's school, Montclair Middle School. I want an independent investigation.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything from the board before we have a motion to adjourn? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So,
Who's second?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Adjourn. Thank you very much.